Yeah, so if you love using customer review data to create new marketing angles with copywriting and products, I think you might like checking out this video. In it, we talked about AI tools and overviewed some of them that can help you gather reviews. So if you don't know how to use them or the software to use them, how to gather them, synthesize them, and then use them to help you with anything you want when it comes to marketing, understanding your customer, and creating new products.
Yeah, so we went over a scraping tool to get all those reviews, how to bring those reviews into a few different AI tools, and what we liked about them, what we didn't, what the pros and cons were. We're doing this because we're building ecom brands and we're diving into all these new AI tools that can help us do more for less.
So there's two things we do as quickly as we can whenever we bring on a new client to help them with their marketing. The first is we design a voice of customer survey to get open-ended responses from customers on a series of questions that we create and modify to help us understand them a little better. The second thing we do is we take their reviews and analyze them to see what common patterns arise on both the positive and the negative. And something that we also look for is where are there gaps in the feedback from customers, either from the voice of customer survey or from their reviews, that could be used in the marketing that the client isn't already doing. And so in the past, sifting through hundreds or thousands of reviews, hundreds or thousands of feedback in the form of voice of customer survey responses would take days. It'd take maybe 3 hours a day spread over 3 or 4 days to really digest and marinate on all the feedback that the customers were giving so that we could really feel it in our veins and then spit that back out into the marketing in our marketing ideation. But thanks to AI now, like we've now found ways, or we're exploring ways rather, in which we can sort of compress the amount of time it takes to digest so much information and do it in a way that's at least directionally reliable as doing it manually, if not better. Because for me, at least, when I was looking through, line by line, the feedback from customers, it's like I would sometimes forget to see patterns that were there and in front of me. But because I was trying to take in so much data with my brain, it was just hard to know, like, am I missing something? Am I keeping track of everything? Am I taking enough notes? Am I taking too many notes? And so it'd be overwhelming at times. And so I've been really excited at some of the things that you've been looking into, Alfred, around using AI tools to synthesize all this data that we can get from customers, to then use in marketing or use in product development. So I think that's one of the things that we can look into today is the different solutions that you've tried out. So maybe we can start off there. Maybe if you could share and list out some of the ones that we've tried out. I think that's a starting point that we can kick it off with and then go from there.
Yeah, so I think maybe the most obvious one that we tried was just to put our reviews directly into ChatGPT and just ask questions around there. And I think one of the challenges we ran into there was that we just couldn't put thousands of reviews in there and have it all have ChatGPT look at it all at once and give us some synthesized data. So we looked at ChatGPT, we looked at Notion AI, we've looked at Octane AI, we've looked at ChatGPT plugins, and we've also tested out building our own chatbot and feeding it our own data. In this case, it would have been customer reviews.
Yeah. So before we jump into some of the I guess exploration that you did, and walking through the different solutions that you can use, and some of them are more or less optimal than others. I think sort of reiterating why doing this is important is worth touching on, just because even for myself, when it comes to trying to come up with new angles or new ideas, a lot of times I tend to default to trying to be the creative one, when really I think in this time, with the internet and all the resources we have access to, creativity can at times be more about being more resourceful than it is about being like having the ability to create something out of nothing. And I think when it comes to marketing, one of my favorite sort of stories that I may be misquoting the exact details of, but Gary Halbert, who is a very famous copywriter that a lot of people learn from, there's a story about him and a copywriter who went to visit him to, I think, work on a project. He like hired him to help him with the project. And I think for the first 2 or 3 days, they were basically doing nothing. Like the guy went over, he's like anxiously wanting to work on copy with him. And Gary just like sort of like hanging out. They're like, I don't know, riding around the town. They're just doing anything but what seemed to be like work. And then by the time like the week I think progressed and like Gary was getting ready to work, what work actually looked like was getting a stack of magazines in the niche that they were going to write in and like absorbing as much of it as possible and like really understanding the market. And so now in 2023, our version of that doesn't necessarily have to be sifting through magazines that we buy at the grocery store to understand the market. It can be, hey, taking the information that we have access to, whether it's our own first party data or whether it's data that we can get access to by tools that can scrape competitors or adjacent markets, and use that and synthesize it through AI software so that that digestion process can be even more optimal. I think where there's a lot of value there is if you're ever stuck, if you ever have a blank page sort of in front of you, but you need to like write a new ad, create new ad videos, new sales pages, there's a way now to never run out of ideas. And that is just being resourceful with the data that we have available and the synthesis of it now too, that's aided by AI. It doesn't have to be all of your synthesis. You can still use your brain and like come up with the ideas yourself, but it can be augmented and assisted quite a bit by AI, which is really exciting.
Yeah, that's really cool. One of the things that I noticed from you is you're really good at doing research, and just this concept of looking at other brands was a really cool idea that I had never really considered either. And with all these tools that we're going to look at a little bit later, it makes our lives so much easier and kind of brings the ability to research competitors, research the space, to anyone who really wants to do it. And I think now is there's no reason not to do it, because it's just so much easier than it ever has been. I think maybe a lot of people in the past would just like, that's too much work. Let's just use our instinct. And you've never shied away from that. You've been like, okay, I think this is important. And now now that it's a lot easier to do, there really is no reason that we shouldn't do it.
Yeah, I think in the past, it's just so mind numbing. It's like you have to look at, a Google sheet or an Excel file or even just the website of reviews and like slowly going through them one by one is just a really mind numbing process that not everyone is built for. Like some people love it. I love it at times because I can really I feel like I'm getting a chance to really understand the customer, but I could see myself also at times not like it's too much work and it's really, really boring. And so now you get the ability, it opens up the ability to a lot more people and personality types to get the same information that you wouldn't otherwise get if you didn't have the, assistance of AI. It's like in the past, I wouldn't bother with it. Now it's like, okay, like now that something can help me just, read all these thousands of reviews and then I can ask it questions to tell me exactly what I want. Cool. I'll do that. That I'm fine with that.
Yeah, I'd be one of those people that's be like, that's way too much. That's too mind numbing. I wouldn't do that. But now I think we can, and it's like you said, we can start to converse with the data now. We can ask it the questions we want. We don't have to go sifting through it and have some sort of insight come to us. We can even ask it the leading questions to find those insights.
Yeah, and I think something I'd add to it is the reliability of the synthesis of the AI is something that, I was questioning, and I haven't done it thousands of times, but in the times that I have done it and compared it to the AI, I was pretty happy with what it saw. Like I was comparing my manual notes of spending hours and hours in the data with what it synthesized in seconds, and it came up pretty close when it came to, the summary of, let's say, the 5 most common things that where people are saying, and like the supporting evidence of that. It did really good jobs of it, even in the less than optimal tools that we'll take a look at in a little bit. So yeah, that just adds a little bit more to like what you were saying earlier around how there's really no reason to not interact with this data unless you want to be completely radical and not necessarily engage with the customer data that you have access to.
Okay, awesome. So why don't we take a quick look at some of these to see what some of the pros and cons are?
Cool. So, Alfred, before we're even able to use some of the tools like Octane, Notion, custom chatbots, I think one of the first things we need to do is actually have the information that we're going to feed into it. And there's 2 sources, right? One source is your own first party information that you have access to, whether that's the reviews that you can export from whatever review platform you're using, or if you're trying to do some, competitive analyses, understanding customers beyond the scope of the data you have access to, you can look at other websites that you can find publicly. And so one of the things that I've had a challenge with is I understand that you can't, like, I understand that a competitor has a bunch of reviews on their website, but like, how can I actually grab all of them without copy and pasting them in a Google Sheet myself? And so as a starting point, a cool thing we could maybe look at is this brand here that you and I are sort of familiar with. I'm a little bit more familiar in that I've been following them for probably the past decade. But Athletic Greens, that sells AG1, which is really cool because they sell, I think, virtually one product, and it's just like consumable, and they're doing really well. AG1, if we go to their website, they have a reviews page over here. And I think what would be kind of cool is seeing your process for how you can take somewhere between a few hundred and all of these reviews to then input into the different systems that we're going to use to ask a question, so that if we were, let's say, a greens company that wanted to understand AG1's customer a little bit more, so that we can see, okay, where can we fit in a new product, or where can we fit in a new marketing angle? Like, I can ask chatbot that, or I can ask Notion AI that, or I can ask Octane AI that. So yeah, I think it'd be kind of cool to watch you show us, as sort of non-tech people, how exactly you can do that without spending a week of my life copy and pasting information.
Yeah, so in order to get those reviews, I think the most efficient way to do that is through scraping. Scraping sounds like something really technical that you need some programming knowledge to do. And not being a super technical person myself, I kind of shied away from that. And it sounds like you did as well, Andrew, because you're talking about wanting to copy and
Right.
paste it, or having to copy and paste it. But there's actually software out there that makes the scraping process much easier for people like you and me to do it with just a few button clicks. And so one of those is called Octoparse. And I'm just going to share my screen here.
Yeah, it's cool. And while you're doing that, I think on the topic of scraping, I think, at least for me, I've had in the past sort of a negative connotation around it, as like scraping, let's say, information that isn't supposed to be publicly available, or like email addresses or websites.
Mm.
But in this case, scraping is like almost the automated version of, let's say, copy and pasting all of these reviews that I would have done anyway myself. But it's now just done by software instead of me using my hands and fingers and like using Google Sheet. So like, there's nothing inflammatory about what we're doing and how we're doing it. It's just publicly available information that I could have grabbed myself anyway manually, just now being done in a way that I don't have to do it manually. So that's just a reminder for myself, mostly, in that, like, hey, like, scraping is not necessarily a bad thing.
I think this is a conversation that evolves over time, particularly with the the rise of ChatGPT and other AI software, where they scrape the entire internet and use that data to train their models. And now it's, although it's publicly available, um, it's being used in a way that no one could have ever predicted. And now people are starting to have new conversations around like what is actually allowed and what's not, because now you have, say, Midjourney, who has been trained on the art of all these different artists, saying like, hey, I didn't give you permission to do that, and now you're profiting off me. So um I think it's a conversation that uh evolves over time. I think in this scenario, it's more about market research. We're not profiting off of anything here. We're just trying to gain insight on the market. And so I think this is a very tame version of scraping, that I don't think we have to worry too much about.
Yep. Cool.
So in order to get started, we can create a new custom task and just paste the review page. So for AG1, that's this link here. That's the page that you were just showing us. We can hit save, and it'll start doing its thing. So we'll just wait for this to load. Okay, so you can see that the page is loading up and it's thinking. And what it's going to start to do is it's going to start to read the page, find where the reviews are, and just automatically construct an algorithm on extracting the reviews. And if there's, say, multiple pages of reviews, it'll figure out what buttons to press and create an algorithm to go to the next page and grab the reviews on the second page and the third page, and so on. And so that's what that's doing right now.
That's amazing that it figures out what buttons to click to go to the next page. That's pretty crazy.
Yeah, I don't know how it's doing that. I'm sure there's, this is a form of AI as well. It's not generative AI, but this is there's a certain amount of smarts going on here to figure out what's going on and what to do with it. All right. So now that it's read all the data on the website, you can see that it has an option to identify when there needs to be more pages to scrape, and also to scroll the page as it goes along. So you can see here it found, a number of fields. So let's say, for example, if we go to this first one, lovely, just a little too sweet. So we've got lovely, just a little too sweet from Robin. So that's all that data from this one review, and it goes down. Great product from Annette, good taste, very portable, etc. And so what we can do here is we can actually make some updates. So we can say, okay, well, this field here doesn't really make a lot of sense. It's just the first letter of the name. We don't need that, so we can just get rid of that. We can maybe get rid of this one because we don't need that either. And we can reorder some of this. So maybe we want this column here to come up to the front. So we can, oh yeah, so we need to create the workflow first, and then we can reorder it. Okay, so now that the workflow is created, we can reorder some of these. We can rename them. So we could say this is the name. We can call this one date. We can call this, actually this is probably titles. And then this one is, we can call that the review. And there we go. So those are the fields that we would want. It's pulling the data that we need, and we can just go ahead and run the task. And so we can just run this on our device, and there we go. Now we can see it extracting all the data, and as it goes along, it'll go to the next page, and we just need to wait for this to complete. Since there's thousands of reviews, this is going to take a while. So we can just jump straight to the end when we have all of it completed. Once it's done extracting all the reviews, you can export it to an Excel file, which is what I've done here. And now we have an Excel file with about 10,000 reviews in it. So we have our format that we had previously: title, review, name, and date. And now that we have all this data, we can take it and start putting it into some of these AI tools to see what kind of insights that we can get from it. One of the first tools we tried was something called Octane AI. Andrew, I think you had found them. They're an app that connects directly into Shopify if you're using Shopify, and allows you to read your own first-party data directly from whichever reviews app that you use. And so, for example, we use Looks, and so we can just download our Looks reviews and upload them into Octane. So I think, Andrew, you had worked with it a little bit more. What were your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I think intuitively feeling it felt well, let me start with what I liked about it. I think what I liked about it was that it was probably the most user-friendly one to use when it comes to utilization of data, right? You don't have to copy and paste your reviews. You don't have to download it from a CSV or into a CSV and then put it into, turn it into PDF. Like, it's just, it imports it from your store. It's like, it's very clean. So that's a really nice part about it. And I think if you don't want to play around with data, like you just want to start asking questions right away, I think Octane is a really good option. When it came to the response that it gave me, what was interesting for me was how it felt a little bit more choppy than what I would get from ChatGPT. Like, if I were to do the manual labor of like copy and pasting things into ChatGPT or into Notion AI or something else that we've built, the answers just seemed a little sluggish. And I don't know how, it wasn't so much the speed of the answers, although that was a little bit slower too than, let's say, ChatGPT. But the answers that I was giving felt a little bit less smooth and less, it's hard for me to describe it using words other than what I used, but it just felt that way. It felt like I get a more smoothish feeling of the answers when I get it at ChatGPT. I think part of that factor as well was some of the prompts that I was using. I would give it the same prompts. I would give it the same prompts as I gave ChatGPT with the same data relatively, and it would be a little bit funky. So, for example, if I asked it to write, 5 pieces of ad copy, it would start on like the last line of the third piece of ad copy, and then go from the end of the third to the fifth, but like 1, 2, and 3 would be gone. And so it was just a little bit clunky in that way. And also, one of the challenges that we noticed was if you had more than, let's say, I think 200 reviews or a certain number of reviews for a single product, then you have to either upgrade tiers, or there might not be a tier that's like readily available. Maybe you got to get an enterprise tier. And so that was an interesting as well, because if you've got a product like Athletic Greens where all of your reviews is one product, then the limitation seems you can meet that limitation pretty quickly. So those were some of the things that I noticed about Octane AI. So I think I would use it if I just want to ask things really quickly. I don't want to deal with things, manually, and I just want to ask questions out of the box. But if I'm wanting to sort of almost like driving a manual car, if I want to be a little bit more customized with the way that I'm approaching things and like being very particular about the way that I'm getting the information back and the information that I want to use, then I might consider some other options.
One of the other challenges that we had was if we wanted to do research on other brands, then there wasn't really a great way to do that, because, let's say we wanted to look at Athletic Greens, which is what you were showing us earlier. We don't have access to their reviews app, and so we can't just download it in the format that it's asking for, and so we don't really have a way to use Octane in that scenario. It's more for your own data, and And so for the purposes of what we're trying to do here in this video, it's not really meant for that purpose. The other option that we had looked at was Notion. And so Notion has an AI feature as well. But one of the challenges that we had with there is just that it can't take in too much data at once. So there's a certain token limit. I'm not sure what Notion's token limit is, but when I put in just say 200 reviews, it couldn't even look at all of those at once. And so there's definitely a limitation, especially if we're trying to get thousands of reviews looked at all at the same time. So not really great for that purpose. And it's a similar problem to what we'll see with just normal ChatGPT as well.
Yeah. Again, with Notion, it's like a step further where if you're okay with copying and pasting the data, it could be a really quick solution for you potentially. But again, that limitation of how much information you can feed it makes it a bit of a constraint when it comes to you have to do things in batches potentially on different pages, and the data can't synthesize all the information all at once in the way that you'd want it to. Like if you were to ask it, the 5 most common pieces of feedback, you might be missing the actual common piece of feedback if you happen to have a selection bias by mistake on like a certain cluster of the data that was just talking about this one thing instead. So There's limitations and you can work your way around it, but there are solutions that we can explore a little more, and we'll see when it comes to either custom chatbots, plugins with ChatGPT, you can take a look at those.
To start, I think the simplest thing would be to just grab our data, throw into ChatGPT. So why don't we try that? Okay, so we're looking at ChatGPT now, and I've just copied all the data, and I want to just paste it in here. But there's going to be a limit to how much data that ChatGPT can actually process at once. And it may violate their content policy, apparently. So maybe we don't actually want to go ahead and do that. Let's instead try just the title and review columns. So instead of doing all the data, I'm just doing the content between that the customers are actually submitting and not their names or the dates. And still, okay. And perhaps it's just too much. So let's just do a smaller number of reviews. Let's do that. And so it seems like potentially it's an issue with the amount of data that's being put in. I'm not super familiar with all the different policies that ChatGPT has, but we know for sure that there's way too much data for ChatGPT to process at once. And so we know that's not necessarily going to work. So I just pasted in without actually a prompt. And so it's actually starting to just reformat it, but we can ask it some questions. So we say, share the 3 most common pieces of feedback that customers gave, along with 3 direct quotes for each of the piece of feedback. Now there's only 15 or so reviews here, so there isn't that much insight that we're going to be able to get from it. But ChatGPT is going to be able to work with what it has and does a decent job for what it has. The challenge, again, is just there's not a lot of data. So how do we get more data from here? And that's where we can start to use the ChatGPT plugins. So we can take a look at those. So we've opened up a new chat with ChatGPT using their plugins. So we have 2 different plugins installed, one called Ask Your PDF and another one called Chat with PDF. And so what we can try now is to actually upload a PDF version of the reviews and then chat with the PDF, which gives us the ability to feed ChatGPT more data than we otherwise would have been able to if we had just put it in the message zone. When we tested this earlier, we realized there was a 300-page limit. And so when we had 10,000 reviews, 300 pages ended up being about 3,000 reviews. So we had to really bring that down. So if this is our PDF here, I only kept the title and the review just to kind of save some space or some characters and to limit to be able to fit more reviews on the number of pages that we have available. But we only have 300 pages of reviews here, which is still a lot, but not the whole data set that we have. And so what we would do is, if we were, say, going with Chat PDF, we were supposed to upload it. So there's a review link. I don't remember exactly what the review link is. So maybe we can ask it. So we want to use ask your PDF. So with ask your PDF, where do I upload my PDF files? And it should hopefully give us a link where we can upload it. Okay, right here. So let's do that. Okay, so I'm going to grab my PDF file and just upload it here. And once it's done, it's going to give you this doc ID. So we can just copy that. We can come back here and just say, this is my doc ID. And we can start chatting with it. So we can ask them the same question we had asked previously. So we want it to share the 3 most common pieces of feedback the customers gave, along with 3 direct quotes for each piece of feedback. So let's see what happens. So here are the results. It looks pretty good. It gives you a summary of the 3 most common feedback types, right? So these are the 3 ones right here, and provides examples of each and the exact page where we can find it. So really cool. Allows us to get a synthesis of the data without having to dig through all of it one by one.
Yeah. And I think the cool thing about using it in ChatGPT is something that you pointed out, off of this recording, and that is you get the in-context abilities to ask it sort of follow-up questions, or to retain the context in which you asked, for something. Like, for example, with these 3 reviews, you could ask it to, write a Facebook ad using the information here as an example.
Right. So you shared a question that you'd be interested in seeing, so we can try that right now and see what happens.
What I like about it while ChatGPT is doing its thing is I found that generally ChatGPT is pretty good at understanding the prompts that you're giving it. Whereas some of the other solutions that we've tried, the prompts, even if they're the same prompts, they might not give as good of outputs when it comes to understanding what it is that you're asking for. So I like that you have that ability within ChatGPT using the plugins to generally, get what it is you asked for, even if what it spits out to you isn't exactly what you look for when it came to the quality of it. So for example, the ad copy here, I think it needs more tweaking. But I like that it at least followed the instruction of, okay, here are the 5 things that I found. And also here are the 5 different variations of ad copy based on the 5 things I found.
Given what you know about the brand, you said you've been following them for the past decade, so you should know them pretty well. And given also your marketing background, what do you think of these? Are they good starting points? Are they, 80% there, just need a bit of tweaking, or are they just maybe ideas that need to be really worked with?
For me personally, I think these are pretty bad.
Okay.
But the thing here is, I think it has more to do with the prompt that I gave it than it does have to do with the output itself. I think generating ad copy or ad ideas from one prompt of asking ChatGPT, hey, read what's in the PDF or read what's in the Excel file, or like the information from the Excel file that was turned into PDF, read this and then make an ad. I think it needs more steps in between to make the output better. So we probably need to do some sort of chain prompting along the way, but it did what it's supposed to do. And so I think this has more to do with the user than it has to do with ChatGPT itself.
Right. And I think this is our experience in general with ChatGPT, Midjourney. It's like you're never going to get it right on the first try.
Yeah.
but it always does exactly what you tell it to do, and it's just us that realizes, oh, maybe my instructions weren't good enough.
Yeah, exactly. Like there's nothing wrong with its copy at all. I just think that it's not gonna be what's required to perform when it comes to
Right.
does it actually grab attention? Is it actually saying something different or new? Um, Not really. And again, that falls on the prompt, I think, more than it does on um, the system. Because I think with the right prompts, you could eventually get to a point where it uses the same data of the reviews that we fed it, but it uses it in a different way that's more effective, which we played around with, to come up with some decent copy that's either story driven or more hook driven. It's just for the prompt itself that we gave to just see how well ChatGPT would do with reading the information and then outputting it in a way that we requested. I think it did a good job of that.
And I think the most important thing here is it can actually read the data, right? We aren't limited to whatever we can place inside this little text box here. We can feed it an external document and actually start to work with that additional data set to make make this ad copy. Whereas in the past, I think we'd have to try to feed it in here. We would describe the company, or in certain cases, maybe it's been trained to know a little bit about Athletic Greens. But here now we have all this additional information that we can use directly.
I think what's cool is that even though there's a limit of 3,000 reviews, it's still pretty good size wise. I mean,
Yeah.
you don't really hit that level of reviews until you're probably doing maybe north of 5-10 million or even more potentially. So it's still a sizable amount. And even if you have more reviews than 3,000, what you could potentially do is slice and dice your data if you prefer using the plugins.
So we were using the Ask Your PDF plugin, but there's more than one plugin that's able to read PDF files. And another one is called Chat with PDF. So we were using Ask Your PDF previously, but there's another one here that's called Chat with PDF. And how this one works is you can upload a file to Google Drive and then just paste the link into here. And essentially works the same way, but you have more than one option to try out. The last method we're going to look at is with a custom trained chatbot. So this chatbot we're looking at here was trained on the Athletic Greens AG1 reviews that we were looking at previously. And it's not just the first 300 pages, it's the actual entire list that it's been trained on. And that may sound really technical, but it actually wasn't as challenging as you might think. So we found this tutorial online, and it takes you through all the steps on how to build your own chatbot. It does require some Python, so it may be a little bit challenging, but it's not as bad as you would think. It uses something called Llama Index, which, without getting into too much detail, and it's not something I fully understand myself, but it's a free to use. You can bring in all sorts of data into it, and it'll help to understand it and build your own chatbots. And so that's what this tutorial is doing. You can get Llama Index off of GitHub, but for all of you non-technical people out there, I would say that this is still doable because we have ChatGPT. We can ask it questions on how to troubleshoot through some of these problems, and you could probably get this all done within a day if you work through it. And that's essentially what we did. So we kind of put all the code into and kind of worked through it. There was some debugging that needed to be done because the code in the tutorial uses an older version, and so we had to make some modifications to make that work. But ultimately, we end up with a chatbot that looks something like this. And so we can ask it some of those same questions that we had previously. So, for example, we can ask it to share the 3 most common pieces of feedback that customers gave, along with 3 direct quotes for each piece of feedback. So let's see what happens. Okay, so we've got product quality, customer service, and value, and some quotes there. And let's say we want to do that follow-up where we create some ad text. So let's do that same thing. So this is the same questions that we had asked with the ChatGPT plugins. So let's see what this looks like. Here are some of those ad texts. So Andrew, I'll give you a chance to absorb some of those, but you can let me know what you think how they compare to the ChatGPT plugin versions.
Yeah, I think they're pretty similar. I think we're running into a similar challenge where I think the prompt is where the utility comes from over like the actual system itself. I think the system does well when the prompts are good. I think to get copy that I would be interested in testing, I would probably need to do a few prompts in a row to get things to where I want to be. But as a starting point, this is really good when it comes to like, hey, we have raw information that we fed it. Can it read this and synthesize it for me to a degree? And so that's what I really liked about it. And I think what I like about this in particular as well is the limitations that are here, or rather the limitations that aren't here potentially. So I know this potentially is working with all 10,000 data points, but maybe in a way that is a little more nuanced than the way I'm putting it, that maybe you can chime in on.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that we ran into when we were just using ChatGPT on its own was this concept of a token limit. And so I'm no expert, but essentially it just means that it can only hold so much data at once. Using the so this chatbot here uses the OpenAI API, where we can use their 32K token model, which allows us to hold more data at once. So I think already there, that's better than the common chat GPT that's available. So that's one added advantage. Where this chatbot, and I think also the chat PDF or the Ask Your PDF plugins, what they're doing is they're probably vectorizing the data. So it's just kind of like taking the data and chunking it into smaller pieces so that it can fit into these token limits. So even though we have this 32K token model, we have more reviews than can fit inside the 32K tokens at once. And so here we have to break it apart into smaller chunks, just like what you'd probably have to do with the Ask Your PDF and Chat with PDF. And so what is happening under the hood is a little bit beyond my understanding, but where I think some of the challenges are is that you're going to have some reviews in this chunk, some reviews in this chunk, and somehow it has to be able to pull the relevant information from your question. And so if we're asking it a direct question of like, what do customers think about the taste? Then I think what it's able to do is check all the individual chunks one by one to see where it talks about the taste and then come up with an answer. But when we're asking it a more general question to say, what are the most common reviews, then it has to sort of look at everything at once to make that comparison. And I think that's where both the plugin, Ask Your PDF or Chat with PDF, and this chatbot may run into some trouble. Now, again, I'm not a super expert on this, but this is just my limited understanding. But I think that's where some limitations are, and where understanding that we can ask it the questions where it's better designed to do.
Got it. Does this have to do with sort of the concept of structured and unstructured data? So the data we gave it was unstructured, but if you give it a prompt that is more focused around taste or packaging or shipping times, it's able to give you answers that are relevant to that topic a little bit better because it can deal with the unstructured data in a more focused way?
I don't think it has to do with the way it's been structured. I think it has to do with whether, in order to answer that question, it has to look at all the data at once. So when we're asking about shipping times or taste, it can look at the individual chunks and just see, does this chunk have anything about taste in it? And if it does, it can just pull that portion out and hold that in memory and move on to the next one. But a more general question, like what are the 5 most common ones? I don't know how it's going to do that chunk by chunk without needing to look at everything at once and say, like, because you might have one chunk where one type of common is more common, and another chunk where a different one is more common. And so we need to be able to look at both of those at the same time and hold those while looking at everything else, and before making that comparison.
Got it. Cool. So in some ways, like as long as you ask the right quote unquote prompts, you should still be getting the information that you're going for.
Yeah. And I just want to leave a caveat there that's my interpretation of some of the limitations. Again, not an expert on how vectorization or LLMs work, but based on my limited understanding, that's what I think is happening.
Yeah, that's cool. Well, what I really like about the bot that you created is I think UI wise, I really like it. It's just very clean. I don't have to worry about copy and pasting data. I don't have to worry about, taking that 10,000 review file and chunking it into 3 different ones. I like that. It's just like much cleaner here. So when it comes to like my use case, I actually quite like this quite a bit. But there are limitations. I think one of the limitations that you're currently working on around it is to get some sort of in context, and the vocabulary I'm using might not be the most accurate, but like in context learning or like carry over the conversation, right? Where it's like if I'm asking it to tell me, hey, the 5 most common things about the taste that were commented by the customers, and then I want it to write 10 different pieces of ad copy in a separate prompt. Right now, that hasn't been coded yet. Is that right?
No, actually, that's something that we do have. So
okay, that's awesome.
So we have this conversation is a conversation. It may not look as good as ChatGPT, but this is the bot response, and here was our question. So we could ask it a further question and give it a contextual one. So for example, we want to ask, please expand on your third, on ad number 3. So let's see what comes out of that. And if it doesn't have any context, it wouldn't know what ad number 3 is. But since it did provide 5 different ads in the previous response, it should be able to understand what we're talking about here. And so attention, get cool. Ready to feel refreshed, and get ready to feel refreshed. So now it's given us more of a paragraph instead of just the ADA components.
Yeah. I think the really cool thing about this bot that you've built is that it's multi-applicational. It doesn't just have to be reviews that you give it. It could be internal information around like questions and answers that the executive team always gets, or like certain processes that you've laid out that could just be fed into the system. Like it doesn't have to be reviews. So this is actually really exciting for me, especially for companies that are bigger and could benefit from a chatbot, where previously you'd have to ask someone repeatedly the same question, or like the same person gets 10 of the same question from 10 different people all the time, because people would prefer to interact with something over looking it up in like a long document or a wiki. This could be repurposed for that, which is really exciting for me.
Yeah, no, it's really cool. And like you said, there's so many different applications it could be used for, internal or external. And yeah, it just makes It's just when we see these different applications of using AI, it gets more and more exciting, because we can think of so many different ways in which to use it.
Yeah, completely. Because like for me, I much prefer interacting with a chatbot than I do having to scroll Google. Even though I do have a bit of like a history with the way that I like to receive information, which is if ChatGPT gives me an answer, I do have some preference to like seeing the options of answers more than I do like just the one answer and then following it and knowing and believing that that's the one and only answer. Like if I'm cooking and I want a recipe for something, I might ask it to give me like three recipes to cook the same thing and then I can choose between them. But I still prefer like prompting a bot more than I do actually like searching through Google and whatnot. And so I think that's really interesting when it comes to the possibilities now of doing that with your own data or like doing that with very specific data that you know is what you want to query or that you know is quote unquote higher quality. Like for example, if I know that Alfred in your business you have SOPs that are really effective, I might prefer asking a bot made with your SOPs or that has been fed the information of your SOPs, questions around certain SOPs than I would like asking Google randomly. Like Google might give me the most general thing ever, whereas what I'm asking your bot might actually just be a lot more specific to the use case that I'm looking at it for, knowing that like I want to model a process in your business.
Yeah, I think that's probably where the future is going. Is just every company is probably going to have multiple chatbots, um, for different purposes, trained to very specific pieces of data.
Yeah, exactly. Because like I could imagine a brand that like does, product launches, 12 product launches a year. They're like complicated when it comes to how many channels they roll it out to and advertise on, and like the lead times on it when it comes to um, product development and getting it back from the manufacturing and all that. And like having a chat bot to just be able to ask it, hey, like we are wanting to roll out this type of product by this time, on these specific channels. Give me like a full checklist on like how this should be rolled out. I think that'd be really cool to see so that, or that'd be really cool to create so that eventually you can get SOPs that are created that also have some context behind them. And it's not just like the same Google Doc or the same like checklist in Asana or Notion that's like copy and pasted and then just, you know, having to be manipulated every single time by like a human. Whereas with AI, you could like get it another step closer by giving it like, by asking it for the same, like, give me the process, but adapt it to this context. And so you're already like a step forward in like a lot of the complexities that might have had to be adapted. I can see that being really interesting.
Yeah, yeah, that's really cool.
Awesome. So I think maybe to round off, I think it'd be kind of cool to hear, maybe your take on the where in your arsenal each of these tools fit in. So like there was the ChatGPT plugins that are pretty good and they have their limitations. There's a customized chatbot, there's Octane AI, there's Notion AI. I think it'd be kind of cool to round off on like how we make our choices around which ones we use when, or which ones we use based on how you want to work with your data.
I think the most interesting one is the custom chatbot. For that one, is just that whole discussion that we were talking about. Now we can use it in multiple different ways. I think one thing that we haven't really talked about is that we um, we are using the OpenAI API, so it's only going to it doesn't really store that data indefinitely. I think they have a, a policy where they only hold it for 30 days, and and then they get rid of it. When we upload PDFs into these different services, we don't really know what they're doing with it. So if you have certain privacy concerns, then using the API is generally safer. So I think that's one situation to keep in mind. Um, Also, if you have a lot of data, using the API is also better because it just allows you to uh, have greater token limits, a little bit more flexibility with how you manipulate your data. Um, when it comes to just ease of use, I think using ChatGPT plugins is probably the easiest. You don't need to know how to do anything with programming or Python or anything like that. You just upload a document and chat with ChatGPT, and that's it. So there's a lot to be said about user friendliness, and I think for a lot of people that is enough for them to just use that. And I think it already has a ton of utility just on its own. Even forgetting the user friendliness, there's a lot of utility with just the uploaded PDFs. It works quite well. Um, and yeah, I think with Octane, Notion AI for small data sets, uh, Notion AI can work decently, especially if you already have Notion. But if you have ChatGPT, then I would probably just default to ChatGPT instead of using the Notion AI. And with Octane, I think with our experience with it so far, there is a certain user friendliness, like you said, with being able to access our own data. But I think it's a little bit more limited and specific to your own reviews. And so if you wanted to just look at other research or train on, ask questions on SOPs or anything like that, then, it's a little bit limited in that way. And at least right now, the responses didn't seem to be as strong as some of the ones we've seen with ChatGPT or with the custom trained chatbot using the OpenAI API. So I guess to round that off, it's like if you have, I think the most flexible option is to use your own chatbot. The most user friendly one is ChatGPT, and I think those are probably just your two main options, and everything else, I would probably not would probably be not as high on my list.
Awesome. Wicked. Thanks for watching to the end of this video. Please like and subscribe to help us out.
If you want help with implementing AI tools into your business, leave a comment with "the prompted" below and we'll reach out.